I came back into Saloth Harbor on foot, along the tide flats, at low water, the way I used to walk it when I still had a reason to hurry. 10 years does things to a man's hands. Mine were salt cracked to the second knuckle, the nails gone thick and yellow, and my left shoulder sat an inch lower than it used to, from a reef fall that never healed all the way straight. My hair had gone gray at the sides. I didn't know that until I saw myself in a tide pool an hour outside town, and didn't recognize the man looking back. I had been building seawalls for the St. Laurent when the outer reef came down. That was my work. I was the human liaison sent to help shore up a capital that flooded twice a year, back when the treaty between our peoples was 3 years old, and nobody trusted it yet. I was not important. I was a man with calluses, and a level, and a habit of listening, before I opened my mouth, which the court found strange in a human, and stranger still, in one who kept company with their queen. Ilith was young then, newly crowned, carrying a drowned city on her back, and getting little patience from advisors who wanted a colder woman on the throne. I never gave her advice she didn't ask for. I fixed what she pointed at. I stood quiet in rooms where men twice my rank were shouting. That was the whole of it, at first. Then it wasn't. The reef came down on a working morning, no storm, no warning, just old stone giving way under new weight, the way stone does. There were 6 children on the shoal side collecting shellfish for their mothers. I was closer to the latter than any of my crew. I don't remember choosing. I remember mud, and then salt water going green over my head, and then nothing, for what turned out to be a long time. I pieced the rest together later, since a man doesn't get to know his own funeral firsthand. All 6 children made it up the ladder. My crew pulled nothing from the water but a torn glove and a length of rope frayed through at the middle. They dragged the shoal 2 days before the charts told them there was no body left to find, only current, running one direction, out past the shelf where no harbor boat had reason to go. Ilith ordered a 3rd day anyway, against 2 counselors, who told her a queen's time belonged to the living. She went out on that search skiff herself. I did not learn that until this morning, from an old woman who'd crewed it. I did not drown. I want to say that plainly, because for 10 years everyone I knew believed I had, and grief is a kind of fact once it's lived in long enough. A current took me out past the shelf to the outer atoll, a spit of dead coral no boat came near, and I lived there. I fished with a bent rebar hook. I caught rain in a cracked hull plate. I carved a mark into a length of driftwood every morning to keep the days from running together, until I had 400 of them, and then I stopped counting, because counting had become its own kind of grief. I kept one thing from before the fall. A length of woven tide rope, the kind harbor wives braid for husbands going out on long hauls. 3 colors for 3 vows. Return, remember, belong. Ilith had tied it around my wrist herself, in a doorway, with no ceremony and no witnesses, the week before the reef came down. She never said what it meant out loud. She didn't have to. The atoll teaches a man what he actually needs, which is less than anyone in a harbor town believes. Fresh water, from a fault in the coral that wept it slow after rain. Food, if I was patient and didn't waste a hook on the wrong current. What I did not expect to need, and needed anyway, was the tide rope on my wrist. I took it off exactly once, the first winter, meaning to use the fiber for fishing line, when my other cordage rotted through. I sat with it in my hand a full day, and put it back on instead, and went hungry 2 more days rather than cut it. That is not a story I am proud of, but it is the truest thing I can tell anyone about what 10 years alone does to a man's sense of what's worth keeping. A supply skiff found me 11 months ago, half by accident, running survey lines wider than the old charts allowed. It took the rest of that time to walk this far, and to trust that walking back was the right thing at all. The ship's medic wanted me kept another season for observation. I told her a man can heal his legs on a moving deck as well as a still one, and she let me go regardless. I turned the return over more nights than I could count on that slow voyage home. Whether a woman who'd had 10 years to become queen without me had any use for the man who used to fix her seawalls, or whether showing up unannounced, salt-scarred and gray, was a kindness to her or a cruelty. I decided a man doesn't get to make that choice for someone else, so I walked. The fish market went quiet before I reached the second stall. I heard my name pass hand to hand behind me, the way word does in a small harbor, fast, and wrong in places, and true enough in others. A boy dropped a crate of eels. An old woman I didn't know grabbed my sleeve and stared at my face like she was checking it against a memory. By the time I reached the harbor stair, there were 40 people behind me, and nobody had said a word to me directly. The guards at the Watch Palace stair didn't know me. Why would they? 10 years is a long time to hold a post. One of them put a hand flat against my chest, not unkind, just careful, and asked who I was and what business I had. I didn't have an answer that would satisfy a guard, so I held up the driftwood marker instead. 400 days of a knife notch, the same pattern I'd once carved into a support beam under the old seawall, a habit I used to tease me about, said I marked wood like other men prayed. The younger guard frowned at it. The older one went very still. That's a survey hand's cut, he said. I've seen it on the number 7 piling my whole life. He didn't ask my name again. He turned and went up the stair 2 at a time, and I stood there with my ruined hands and my one piece of driftwood, and I let myself, for the first time in 10 years, hope for something, instead of just enduring. She came down the stair without her guard, without her advisors, in a plain work wrap like she still wore in the old flood years, not the ceremonial robes I'd have expected on a reigning queen. Her hair had gone the color of wet slate at the temples, same as mine had gone gray. She stopped 4 steps up, where the light came down clean and daylit through the harbor arch, and she looked at me the way you look at something you have refused to stop believing in for so long that the belief has become its own kind of proof. Around her wrist, plain against the gold court bands she wore for everyone else, was a length of black mourning cord. Say Lauren wear it 1 year for the dead. She had worn hers for 10. Nobody in that crowd said a word. I heard the water against the pilings, and gulls somewhere out past the breakwater, and my own pulse, loud and unglamorous in my ears. They told me the reef took you, she said. Her voice hadn't changed at all. I told them they were wrong for 9 years before I stopped saying it out loud. I never stopped believing it. I would have come sooner, I said, if I'd known which was kinder, coming back, or letting you keep whatever peace you'd made without me. There was no peace, she said. There was a cord I would not cut, and a court that stopped asking me to. She came down the last 4 steps herself. She didn't reach for my ruined hands first. She reached for the tide rope on my wrist, turned it once between her fingers to find the pattern she'd braided into it herself, and satisfied, she untied her own mourning cord with steady hands in front of every dock worker, fishwife, and guard on that stair, and she did not hide that her eyes had gone wet doing it. "Welcome home," she said. 2 words, no trumpets, no proclamation, no court scribe writing it into any record, just the harbor, and the gulls, and 40 people who would tell this story their own way for years, and none of them wrong. I didn't have anything grand to answer with. I'm not a grand man. I took her hand, the one that had just let go of 10 years of grieving me, and I held it the plain way I always had, like something worth being careful with, not something to be won. We walked back up into the town together, past the fish stalls and the eel crates and the seawall I'd built with my own 2 hands before the reef ever came down, and nobody made way for a king. They made way for a man who'd been gone a long time, walking beside the woman who never stopped setting a place for him.